the June 15th meeting of the Nevada City Planning Commission. We are called to order. I'll read the mission statement. The City of Nevada City is dedicated to preserving and enhancing its small-town character and historical architecture while providing quality public services for our current and future residents, businesses, and visitors. This Planning Commission meeting convenes on the ancestral territories of the Nevada City Rancheria Nisenan tribe. Pledge of Allegiance. I'll lead us. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Okay, we have Commissioner Ermshar,
Here.
Commissioner Van Zant,
Here?
and Chair Nye.
Here.
Absent is Vice Chair Cobden and Commissioner Brown.
Okay, now is the time that we can take public comment if anybody wishes to address the Planning Commission on something that's not on the
On
agenda.
something that's not on the agenda.
Hope it isn't. Look, two things, just real quick.
Would you identify yourself?
Oh, I'm Judith Lowry. I live locally here in Nevada City. And as I was telling you earlier, I've just sent my art collection out of the region. Many years ago, the Joan Mitchell Foundation, which I'm affiliated, after 9/11, they put out a program about how artists should protect their studios and their collections. And I don't know if it's in your purview, but just to put this out there to the public, if you're an artist, you have a studio, and you have those valuable things, they can't fit in your go bag. So it's a good idea to have them placed somewhere else where they'll be safe during the fire season at least. In my case, it's a time of life thing. I need to give that collection to a good museum, and I have. But the second thing I want to talk about is the little firehouse. A few years ago, I was able to make a good sale, and I got some volunteers together, and we went in and kind of beautified and made safer. We put in tempered glass where there had been old cracked glass on wooden rails. We got Mel in there. We put in security cameras and we just sort of made it beautiful in there. But Wally always kept the exterior beautiful and always kept it gleaming white. It is the most photographed building in our city, and it's got a lot of history and story. And now it's sort of looking shabby, and I'm concerned. I put it out on Facebook, so I thought it would just come here and just put it out to the public. Who's taking care of that? Who sees to the regular painting and preservation of, I like to call it FDNC 1, okay? And that's it, thank you.
Thanks, Judith. Any public comment online for items not on the agenda?
We do not.
All right, thank you. All items under the consent calendar, our agenda, are considered to be routine in nature, and all recommended actions of the staff report will be approved by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a member of the commission or public requests otherwise, in which case the item will be removed for separate consideration. Any item so removed will be taken up following the motion to approve the consent agenda. So do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passes 3-0.
God, that was hard. Tough.
Next item, Emerald Bay Extracts, the expansion amendment. It's an amendment of earlier application. Is an applicant present? Yes. Okay, would you like to join us at the?
We actually, excuse me, sorry.
Oh.
We have another on consent item. It's the Drips and Draft Cafe extension of time.
Oh, is that a consent?
Yes, item 2.
Yeah, that was approved in the,
Oh,
in the
okay.
entire agenda.
Thank
yeah.
you.
Yes. False sitting down alarm. Yeah.
There'll be no extra charge for the exercise.
I gotta get my steps in.
No, you can come sit down at the applicant table.
Oh man.
Yeah. Does it feel too grilly there? Would you rather stand up?
Yeah, you know, it does feel more intense than I came on here. It's,
You're on our level.
I feel like you guys are all giving me comments here.
Yeah, would you like to introduce this item?
Yes, I would.
Lisa?
Thank you. So this is Thomas with Emerald Bay Extracts. We got an application, or a request to amend his business to add additional square footage in the building at 138 New Mohawk Road. Currently, they are on the first floor and they want to expand into the second floor. I did have a last-minute request to add more square footage than what was originally requested. So earlier in late May, I guess it would be, they requested 895 square feet additional, and as of yesterday, your new space is just over 2,000 additional. And yeah, I guess we'll give you a chance to talk about the use of the space, and then commissioners will have a chance to ask questions.
Cool. Yeah, so we were one of the first businesses that were licensed here in Nevada City. And so we were one of the first ones operational. We make a medical product in the adult use market, so we're making a product primarily for medical consumers. It's been about 5 years now since we got our license. We've done a lot of growing, expanding throughout the state, and so we're just looking to add some more space primarily for storage of product, just as we have outgrown the space that we are in. As Lisa mentioned, we requested additional space just recently because it became open in the building. Someone else was originally going to rent it. But when they pulled out, we wanted to rent that space as well and just have a little bit more room to grow into.
So, and you're in operation already?
We're in operation, yeah. So we've been in operation for about 5 years at this point.
Okay, and this is the appropriate process for expanding an operational business?
Yes.
Okay.
Above 250 square feet, I believe, was the requirement that we needed to come back
Okay.
in front of the planning commission.
Yeah, anything over 250 square feet needs to have planning commission approval.
I'll just continue asking questions.
Go for it.
And the additional space, you're going to use it for storage essentially? Just for my curiosity.
Yeah, so additional storage and offices are primarily what it is. Like right now, as we've grown, we have two different spaces within our facility, one for manufacturing, one for distribution. In the distribution space, we've just outgrown, we have too much product on the shelf and we need a larger space in order to store it essentially.
And the adult use is not yet an approval, and we're expanding that approval to adult use?
Correct.
So yeah, for us, it's like more procedural. It really makes no difference. In the original writing of the state regulations, it limited who we could do business with. But they changed it in 2018, I believe, and so essentially allowed us to do business with whoever as a manufacturer. And so for us, the adult use versus medical designation didn't really affect our business.
Right, so it's just updating the language of your license.
Exactly, because of the state changing their regulations that essentially said, originally the regulation said a medical manufacturer could only do business with a medical dispensary. But then they changed that to say a medical manufacturer could do business with whoever. So changing it to adult use doesn't actually change anything in our business, just like procedural, I guess.
But you could keep the same designation?
We could keep the same designation and it would not change our business the way that we operate it. Although, as we had begun this renewal process, Amy had sent over the form essentially to change to adult use. And so we just went through with it as she had sent it over. But yeah, I mean, for our business, it doesn't change how we operate at all. Versus the dispensary in town, since they are working with the end consumer, if they were medical versus adult use, it limits who they can do business with. But since we only do business with the dispensary, we're not limited in our operations, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess
Sure.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah.
That's just to me that I'm still trying to understand, like, what is the motivation for changing it, if it's all the same, I guess.
There was, Amy had sent it over and said that the city had changed the rules and sent over the form to do it, so there was no motivation on my end other
Gotcha.
than Amy had sent it over and it seemed like the way the other businesses were doing it, so for me, that change in there wasn't anything that I had even been thinking about.
Initiated or whatever,
Yeah.
gotcha.
And there's no downside to it?
No downside to it, no downside, no upside really, in my opinion, but
Paperwork.
Amy had sent it over as paperwork. We do a lot of those kinds of things, so,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. No questions here.
cool.
Pretty straightforward.
So I will clarify in the recommended conditions of approval, we did change the language from medicinal to adult use, and that's the only changes that were made throughout the conditions of approval.
It says here, adult and medical. So that's what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah.
Covers everything.
We
Okay.
can essentially work with whoever.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, I assume adult is 21?
Adult is
In the-
21
in
unless
this-
they have a recommendation, so medical consumers can be younger than 21 with a doctor's
Oh,
recommendation.
that's new information. Yeah.
And so we, like I said, we make a medical product, and so we actually work with a number of doctors who prescribe it to terminally ill pediatric patients. That really helps them as they're going through chemotherapy, just eating and generally being a little bit happier, so,
Makes sense to me.
yeah.
And what, oh, I see, okay. Okay, so I have no objection. Would someone like to begin the motion-making process?
Okay. We have actually two of them, I believe, and one has to do with CEQA. Do I need to read the whole thing, Lisa, or should we?
Yes, please.
Okay. I am going to make a motion to find the project exempt pursuant to CEQA guidelines, section 15301, existing facilities, because the building is already existing and the proposed manufacturing and distribution use is consistent with the principal permitted uses allowed in the light industrial zoning district pursuant to section 17.48.020, and there is no expansion of use beyond what is already considered a permitted use. Wow.
I'll second that motion. How about a roll call?
Is there two motions on this one, or just the
We're
one?
we're
On the
making them one at a
Just
time,
doing
Yeah.
one at a time?
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Ermshar?
Yes.
Commissioner Van Zant?
Yes.
Chair and I.
Yes.
Okay, your name's down, I promise, and your face.
You're doing great.
You
I know
did
you three.
100% so far.
Last name's a doozy.
Okay, shall I continue on?
There is another motion to be made.
I'm making a motion to approve the amended application as presented to authorize an adult and medical cannabis business permit to Emerald Bay Wellness for a manufacturing and distribution operation at 138 New Mohawk, as described in the amended application, subject to the previously approved conditions of approval as amended, attached, making the findings A and B.
Here, here. I second.
Okay. Commissioner Ermshar?
Yes.
Commissioner Van Zant?
Yes.
Chair and I.
Yes.
Motion carries 3-0.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
You're still in business.
I'll be happy. I'll tell you, I was much more nervous the first time around when it was the initial application.
Well, it's nice to do approvals for expanding businesses in
Yeah.
town, so congratulations.
Yeah, no, it's been a beautiful place for us to operate. So we love Nevada City.
Okay.
So the next item on our agenda is the Public Arts Ordinance, and City Manager Sean Grayson will present that item.
This guy.
Because I had to live through all the committee workshops to get here. Lisa didn't have to, but she did jump in feet first into the deep end and has been doing great, so. If anything is not working out with her, then blame it on me, and anything that's great, full credit to her.
I didn't think that's how you're going to finish that sentence, but, okay.
Oh, all right.
Thought you were going to
Glad
take
you
credit.
guys are coordinating.
Oh, are we?
coordinating
Oh,
your
yeah,
wardrobe.
Yeah.
good job.
Yeah,
That's how I roll.
it's pink day.
It is pink day. It looks salmon sometimes because of the white stripes,
It's
but
nice.
it's pink. Through the city's community-driven strategic planning process, there was a pretty significant input from the community, desire for a public art process in general. Nevada City has always been a community of art and artisans, but has essentially limited or no regulations that authorize it. Our current condition is that art is theoretically, you could apply for it, but there's no conditions in our zoning ordinance that you could look at, and say, yeah, that's the one that we'd make the finding to say you can approve that art. So ultimately the strategic plan came up with 7 strategic initiatives. One of them is called Vibrancy, which is arts, culture, and distinction. And there's a goal, number 2, in there that is specifically develop a public art process, including an enabling ordinance. So the council adopted that in the strategic plan and assigned a Vibrancy committee, which is made up of 2 council members, but also has a lot of public input. And they, over the course of 3 public meetings, have reviewed a public art ordinance from a framework all the way to what you have before you this afternoon. In developing the ordinance, we did look at a number of other cities, including ones that have both a historic district and have successfully implemented a public arts policy. One of probably the most significant and most recent of those that's amended their public art policy is San Luis Obispo. Has a very strong historic downtown, as well as active art in the community. The Vibrancy Committee has recommended that the art ordinance go to the City Council for consideration of adoption. In that process, there will be 2 pieces. One is the public art ordinance, which will be under our zoning ordinance in 17. Under the Planning Commission's purview. There'll also be a public art policy, a companion document, a council policy, and that will speak to what the council's role is in public art and public places. So in other words, how they would go about, for example, if they wanted to put a painting on the wall in this building, what would be the process to do that, that is consistent and fair and equitable, and provides guidance for them in approving or disapproving those kinds of activities. That is not what's before you, but I don't want to hide that there's this other piece, right? So what's before you is about public art on private property, just like anything else that you deal with in the zoning world. So, so the ordinance is drafted, and I'm talking about as drafted, right? Because it's the starting point. So it's a regulatory process. It does require public art to be installed in new commercial development, essentially all non-residential development in the city when there's a value of over $300,000 of construction. There's some exemptions in there, things like solar. If someone put a $500,000 solar system on, like, say, the roof of the tech center, that wouldn't trigger this. But otherwise, for the most part, it would be. Alternatively, they have to provide the public art, or they could pay, and in lieu fee, it's 1% of the construction costs, into a public art fund that would fund public art in other locations. That's a pretty common method used in other cities. I would say it's unlikely we will generate much from that, because we don't get much commercial development. I mean, how much commercial things have you seen in the Planning Commission in the last couple of years? For a good reason, we're not building Targets and other, stores. But nonetheless, it's there. The ordinance also allows for the same process that would be required if they're building new to be applied to existing if somebody wanted to have public art on their private property. So it'd be exactly the same process. They're just not obligated to. And so the way the ordinance is structured is there is an art review authority. The art review authority currently we would anticipate the council would establish that by resolution, and it would be the Vibrancy Committee as it exists today. with the intention, one of the other goals in the vibrancy strategic initiative is the creation of a public art commission. So the city would eventually have 2 commissions. So that's a very different structure, and how they create that is up to the council. But today, that does not exist. So it would be the Vibrancy Committee serving as the Art Review Authority, or any other body that the council determined by resolution. Then, as written, the Planning Commission serves as the Design Review Authority. So you wear multiple hats according to different sections of our municipal code. But Design Review Authority is not a new one for you. So it's essentially the same as architectural review, or, many of the other features that you do. Your review of parklets, for example, is, not even in the planning, world, the zoning ordinance. It's in the streets, sidewalks, and right-of-way section of our municipal code, but it calls for you to serve as that design review function. So essentially, you would be reviewing it the same as you would any other application for an architectural feature that didn't include art. That's what the ordinance calls for now. So essentially, let's say the art piece was a statue with a base and a fence around it. You would review that base, fence, the materials in the same fashion as if it was a fountain or a stage. And you'd have to make findings that is consistent with the architecture and things like that. So it mirrors what is in the existing code, or asks you to make the same findings relevant to the existing code. It does specify that art in the historic district be consistent with the design standards of the historic district, namely the mother lode architecture, but it calls out one specific addition to that, which is, it's defined as prehistory, referring to indigenous populations prior to the gold rush, is essentially what the reference is there, so that art could contain that, whereas mother lode is not. It'd be a stretch for you to, it will be a constant stretch for you to make a finding that, let's say, a 10,000-year-old basket, as an art piece would be consistent with mother lode architecture. Again, this is as it's written, not as it's necessarily would be adopted. So it adds that one component within the historic district. The rest of the city would be the same as the architectural standards within the rest of the city, which is Nevada City architecture. The process would look pretty similar, or exactly the same as any site plan or conditional use permit that you would do, except for it would also require all the elements that are in the plan. The most significant is they would have to submit a maintenance plan and a lighting plan. So those would be part of the, you don't have a maintenance plan for when you do architectural review of a building. This would have a maintenance plan because art sometimes degrades at a different rate than, let's say, a building would. And then a lighting plan, because this is not lighting of a sign or lighting of a building or something else. It's often its own element, so the lighting specific to it would have to be submitted as well. It could be part of a greater site design for you to review, where you review, a new building and the art and the lighting and the like. But if it was a standalone, it would have to have those. So process would generally get submitted to planning. Likely they would call and say, hey, we want to do this. We'd have a pre-application review, outline everything that's in there, just like anything else. They'd submit everything that is in the code. If the planner found it to be material compliant, the submission with the code, the next step would be the Art Review Authority, in this case the Vibrancy Committee, who would review the art, not the not the things that you normally review, the fence and consistency with the architecture that it's around and things like that. They would be reviewing the art. If that was approved by the Art Review Authority, then it would come to you, the Planning Commission, as the Design Review Authority, and then you'd have the same options that you have today for all your other projects, well, most of your other projects: approve with conditions, or disapprove. And so, it'd have to be consistent with the ordinance, and you'd have to make findings that it was or was not if you were going to disapprove. The only difference between what you do today and what's written in here is you wouldn't actually be approving the art. You'd be approving everything but the art, the materials and, you know, where it's hung and the size and everything else. But
Materials of the context of it, but not the art itself.
right, yeah. So for example, Onyx has been pretty vocal that they would at some point like to have a painting on the side of their building, and on the Searles Avenue facing side on their expansion. So this is a hypothetical. They didn't ask me to put this in there. Just it's one that we all are aware of, you know, what it is. So if they came after this was approved and said, hey, we want to put up this, you know, 10 by 12 painting on that sidewall, it would go to staff, go through the process. If it's material compliant, goes for art review authority in front of Vibrancy, who reviews the art content. If approved by them, comes to you. Now you review everything that's happened already, right? So was it approved by Vibrancy? Was there conditions or was there comments? What has staff brought to you? Look at everything like you would normally do. You'd look at size, location, materials, consistency with Nevada City architecture, because this is Seven Hills, not the historic district. But you wouldn't be approving the actual painting. If they painted a horse and you said, I don't like horses, you're not approving or disapproving the horse, so to speak, but the frame, the painting, the size of it. It extends past the building. You could say that's not consistent with the architecture.
Or maybe,
It's
Sean,
too
if they
tall.
use like vinyl graphics instead of paint, or just like that kind of.
Yeah, that's materials, absolutely.
Gotcha.
So,
All right.
you know, there's always risk in public art ordinances with, you know, slippery slope arguments of some people hear public art ordinance and they think authorized graffiti. And then there are really the kind of the other end of the spectrum of the artist says, hey, I don't want any regulations, I'm just an artist, right? First Amendment right, I want to do what I do. This is somewhere in the middle because it's in our zoning ordinance. They're putting it on a property. It has to be consistent with what the zoning standards have. So we don't regulate necessarily that they use red paint versus blue paint, or that they have a wolf versus a horse, because that's the art component. But everything else about it is, you know, subject to the zoning component.
Yeah, the feedback I'm getting has the question on the content of the art. Mm-hmm. Now, we're using the example of painting, but art is painting, it's
Sculptural.
it's structural. You see painting with lights, neon, and all that. I mean, when you say art, it's a pretty wide field. And we, as the Planning Commission, have the responsibility to see that what we use as mother lode is the look of downtown. So the question that I keep getting, you know, for all 3 days that we've, this has been
Yeah,
public,
absolutely.
is, so if the historic district ordinances are very clear that buildings, architecture, and places are mentioned, have to be compatible with mother lode, and, you know, we won't go into
Great.
all of that. But it would be easy to conceive of a modern piece of sculpture or a modern something or other, which may be very nice and very avant-garde, but it would violate the look of downtown as directed by the historical ordinance. Where does that look get?
With you, same as it would if they wanted to put up a steel superstructure with a glass frame, you know,
Okay.
building. And that's where in the actual ordinance as it's written after the design review, after the art review authority, it comes to you to review all of these things. And that's what you're going to look at is all of those items,
And that's laid out in the second paragraph of this.
yes.
this whole-
Yeah, and so we specifically call out there that the historic district, it's all subject to whatever the architecture is, but that the historic district is separate and has its own standards. So for example, the giant rose in Roseville off Interstate 80, are you familiar with that? The red monolith kind of looking
Yeah.
steel structure. it's art, right? So you wouldn't even review the fact that it doesn't look like a rose, but, you know, it's kind of a rose. You wouldn't get that part. But you would get, this is over 35 feet tall, so that's a no. And it's, you know, made out of materials that are consistent with architecture in the historic district, and it's, you know what I mean? So that's, that is where your part comes in, if that makes sense.
Can I-
As written, that doesn't mean that's what the council does.
Right.
I'd like to interrupt. What should our process be here today? Shall we go through it like paragraph by paragraph, or because it seems to me there's some missing language, some missing clarifying language. Are we having? Is this a general introduction of the ordinance, and then we're going to go through it, or? What's your idea?
Whatever your preference would be. So this is scheduled to see the council on the first meeting in July. So anything that the public or you have input on, whether it's written, like we have some written public comment, or from you, obviously there's nobody here with us right now. We will take all that down and bring it to the council. If it is something that, you know, obviously needs reworking or go back through the city attorney's office or whatever, we'll do that and then present it to the council. But if it's what I would like, if it's okay with you, is as much input as possible. What's written here is adoptable as an ordinance, but just because it's done doesn't make it right for Nevada City.
Right.
I'd like to give the council as much information as possible to make the right decision for the city. And so if you want to go through it line by line and give us comments, I'm happy to take whatever you have.
Okay, and I'm aware of a person who'd like to make a public comment. He's not here, and it has to do with this ordinance. And he asked if I would alert him to when that opportunity would be. Curious about the legality of that. I'd like to just send him a text and say now or something. I mean, shall we have a regular discussion, then public comment period, or because this gentleman has kind of a limited time window. It's Stuart Baker of the Chamber of Commerce.
It's a public hearing. I mean, until you close the public hearing, I think the more comment, the better. So, you know, if you
Okay,
want.
well,
And we usually take that before we bring it back to the table for our deliberation. We
Okay,
take-
so.
That would be next.
I would disclose that I would like to send a text to a person who's waiting to make a comment.
For everyone in Cyberland that's watching on Zoom or television, you're welcome to run down to City Hall, make a public comment in person, or Zoom in by clicking the link or dialing the number on the agenda.
We could call over to McGee's and see if there's something anybody wants to
Because
make. a
unlike a
comment.
regular agenda item, this will be slightly like a free-for-all, I think. Would you like to continue with your introduction?
Sure, I think that was the biggest, just general overview of the ordinance. And then if you want to go we could start going line by line while we look for public comment online
He's not on yet.
or coming in.
He's taking a hike someplace, so it may take a second. I just feel like he's got a pretty valuable, point of view to provide input.
And we did, like I said, we did receive public comment just today, all of that. And then anything else comes up, people can comment at the council, obviously, on anything they come up with.
Sean, can you help with a distinction for me? So
Yep.
this is public art. Specifically, it has to be on private property. Will there be something else about public art on public property, or?
That's that policy that I was talking about. So that's
Okay,
the
that's what
council
you were saying.
policy. That's the council purview anyway, right? So the placement of, for example, the stampers in Robinson Plaza or in the Commercial Street lot, right? Those are, you could see them as art, you could see them as a lot of things, but that is the council's purview to place in in public places. There is something in this ordinance as written that talks about, because someone could propose to put their private art in public, right? So they could say, hey, I'm building this building and I don't want to put it here, I want to put it in the roundabout across the street, you know, so like Grass Valley has a roundabout with art in it. If that was the case, it would not come to you as the planning commission. The ordinance as written has the council as the design and art review authority.
And then are there minimum standards for what constitutes public art on private property? So there's an element of being commercial development.
Non-residential, we don't regulate art on residential property.
Okay.
In any of our.
So like, say the ham stand, right? So technically, is that public art, their mural? Or does it have to have a certain level of visibility, or how do we, that's technically public art?
Absolutely.
Okay. So if it's all the way visible, partially visible, I guess, you know, how does one know that they apply for this, I guess?
Is that, so that's unpermitted?
We didn't have a
Because it
process.
was previously
Yeah.
unregulated? It's an unpermitted piece of public art on private property, which would, so the Hamstands mural would come under this ordinance.
It would if this ordinance is passed, as our existing ordinances today don't prohibit murals. They do prohibit signs painted on the side of buildings, with the exception of the 3 buildings in the historic district, including the National. But they don't specifically prohibit murals. So there is, you know, someone could have submitted and said, hey, I want to do a mural, and it could have come to you. But that would be specific to a mural because it's painting on a building.
Would it be advisable then to include language that says all murals that are fully visible to the public on private property are subject to the terms of this ordinance, to essentially, from a regulatory standpoint, control that? If we're curating a cityscape that has to do with art, then it seems like or public art that is not publicly funded should, it seems like a whole somehow. If you don't apply for it, then you're welcome to paint a mural.
No, that would be no different than if you don't apply for it, you're welcome to hang a sign, you know, only until we catch you. You know? It's still,
Well, do you understand the point I'm making, though, that has to do with the Hamstands mural? Should that be regulated by this ordinance?
How so? What do you mean, I guess?
Well, so all future proposed murals need to go through the vetting process of the public art ordinance.
that's what you want added language identifying murals as public art subject to the ordinance.
Yeah, it seems like murals are public art. No, it seems they are public art because they make an artistic statement to the
They
public.
absolutely are. I don't disagree
Yeah.
with you.
So all murals on private property should be vetted through this ordinance.
And
It seems
That's-
like it,
That's in the ordinance now.
sorry, Russ?
It's in the ordinance now.
Yeah.
So anyone in the future who wishes to do that would be in violation of the public art ordinance if they don't go through the proper vetting process, correct?
well,
Correct.
Yep.
and we have to differentiate between the historic district area and the rest of the city. I mean, it's pretty clear to me that the ordinances, the historic district ordinances, really lock down the look of the town, the downtown, the way it is, and directs that look is not going to be messed with or changed without going through a process.
I'll say, if I can interrupt a second, I'll say that Wendy mentioned an example that's in Seven Hills, so we're discussing you know, in general terms, stuff, I think, not in the historic district at the moment.
I will remember that and come back to it. Yes, okay,
Yeah, because I have some thoughts.
So in that case, what's written now, 17-118-80, Public Art Standards, A, public art shall comply with the standards set out in the municipal code for architectural review and design review. In particular, mounting, fencing, framing, and any related support materials shall be consistent with the adjacent buildings. So
there you go.
So that is citywide. B is the historic district, which is
I'm
located.
still trying to find the spot you were referring to, sorry.
Page 6 in the, if you're looking on your PDF, it is page 44 of 57. It's enumerated page 6 on the bottom right-hand corner, and it's at the very top of that page, A.
Thank you for that. 40. Oh, no, that's not how it's numbered for me. I'm sorry. Can you say those numbers again?
It's, yeah, the section is 17.118.080.
Public art standard.
080.
I think so kind of back to like the amount of visibility, because it is private property, so.
Visibility really doesn't, there is no exception if it's not visible.
Right, okay, if it's not
it's-
visible, and so.
It's still subject to this ordinance, just like if
Okay,
they're.
so even if it's like a commercial building, let's say it's a chiropractic office, and it's not in the front, it's on the side, or it's in the back. If they put art up, they have to do this? They
Yeah,
wanna
no
put, like, a
different than
bronze
if
statue?
they wanted to, paint the side of their building or change the siding of the building, in the backyard that nobody can see, it's still required to come through the planning commission.
Is that normal?
Oh, yeah, just like, I mean, if you wanted to do a re-roof of the back of your building that nobody can see, it's still a re-roof. You still have to apply for it. Now, it's ministerial, it'll be approved by staff, but.
Is there a ministerial process for art that is not visible on private property? I mean, it's
No.
still public if it's behind a building and nobody can see it? Wow, all right.
Well,
Did you want to go back to public comment?
Well, it's just so a mural that somebody paints on their building that doesn't go through this process is in violation of city code.
If this is adopted as written and someone painted a mural without going through this process, it would be yes.
Okay, so there's no action necessary to make that, okay. There's no need to update language to include that.
I don't believe so, but we'll certainly ask, if needs to be any more robust language for that.
Okay, do we currently have a public comment?
We do.
Public comments are welcome at this time.
Go ahead, Stuart. You're on with commission. Can you unmute?
Yeah, I'm unmuted.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I should say. This is Stuart Baker calling from the Nevada City Chamber, and I just wanted to offer the Chamber's support in passage of public arts ordinance. It's long overdue, and we really see it as an essential element to revitalizing or further vitalizing the Seven Hills District. The one element we feel is not included that should have some consideration is in the area of temporary art. I think that those types of art installations can be, from a tourism perspective, very positive, and from a community cohesion perspective, they can be a little more bold and interesting without having the encumbrance of what a permanent art exhibit would have on the on the approval process, I should say. So if there is the opportunity to add in temporary art, that would be really great. And otherwise, we absolutely support what we see, and we will continue to advocate for the passage of an ordinance.
Thank you, Stuart.
I might add that before your time, I think the last time we did a temporary art without this ordinance, it was a manzanita woven kind of structure that was, I forget what they were representing. It was down in the plaza for like 2 or 3 weeks. But it was compatible with materials and sign. It wasn't, it wasn't stark modern. And it worked, and it came through this process, and came through your process,
And that's where, so, it's like, for example, if it was in Robinson Plaza, that would be under the council's purview, under the public art policy. And the council has expressed, and the Vibrancy Committee for sure, the intent to explore things like that, temporary art installations of, statues in Robinson Plaza, or paintings, over the bench in front of City Hall, or things that, on a rotational basis. So those wouldn't be through the Planning Commission, but certainly on private property, they would be. And there's nothing in the ordinance as written that would preclude that. And that's where the maintenance plan, in my previous life, we had these, and we had submissions for temporary art. And so they were usually like 120-day to 1 year kind of installations. And so their maintenance plan was often, we're going to take it out before it goes bad. So some were actually planned degradation art pieces. So they will weather, over the next 120 days, they're going to weather into almost nothing, and then we're going to take it out.
What was the time period you mentioned?
Most of those were 4 months to a year was, I think the council policy talks about 90 days or more would be temporary. The policy, which we're not covering today, but would allow the council to approve temporary art installations in conjunction with a special event application. So for example, if the chamber for Victorian Christmas wanted to do, some specific art piece in the Callahan Park or in Robinson Plaza related to Victorian Christmas, that could be approved as part of the special event application. So still wouldn't come in front of you, but all of that would be on the public art policy side of the council, because it's public property. So nothing in here precludes temporary art, but there's nothing in here that calls it out as anything specific either. So I took a note for Stuart's comments there.
It seems to make sense to provide a regulatory framework for temporary art on private property. Because
it wouldn't be any different in theory. It still somebody has to approve it. Somebody has to approve the art. Somebody has to approve the installation. So it still would be art review and design review.
And then time period review, because if it was temporary, it could be less consistent with historic sensibilities. It could be maybe even a little shocking, and if with the knowledge that's going away soon, it could provide some sort of non-permanent, non-terrifying visual entertainment.
So for the record, you're supporting shocking? Is that
Temporary.
So I'm just trying to paraphrase.
Well,
Your recommendation is that we carve out or call out that temporary art is allowed and could have a different approach because of the temporary nature?
Right. The review process might be different based on the knowledge that it's temporary. And it might be a good idea to have some, I don't know if other commissioners agree, but to have some language that specifically limits time duration or size or nature. What do you think of that?
About the idea of having temporary
Right,
installations?
and having, yes, on private property.
I don't see why a temporary installation would be worse than a permanent. not saying that a permanent one is bad, I don't see any harm in a temporary installation. Is that what you're asking me?
I mean, it could be a less generally pleasing work of art,
Well,
universally pleasing,
I mean,
with a short duration.
I think theoretically, maybe. My opinion, though, is like, where I sit right now is not really to talk about type of art or subject of art, you know, because that's not really what my role is right in this, is like more the process of it. And so if temporary art, I think that's definitely a possibility. There aren't any red flags for me about why we shouldn't have a process for approving temporary installations. I am curious about how essential it is to create an ordinance with kind of two forks and two processes straight out of the gates for the Seven Hills District and the Historic District. Given that this is so new for us, in my opinion, it would also not be harmful to do like a test, learn, and apply approach of beginning with an art ordinance just for the Seven Hills District. You heard Stuart specifically cite that that was where he was excited about vitalizing via art. And so, in my opinion, there's a lot we could learn with how does that go before we tackle the more controversial part about public art in the historic district. So that would be my personal recommendation.
So just for clarification, Seven Hills District doesn't exist. So there's no such thing in zoning, right?
Well, the
So there is
non-historic
the historic district and there's everything else.
And the non-historic district, so my opinion would be, let's test, learn, and then apply those learnings to, you know, we're trying to anticipate how a historic district art ordinance looks compared to the rest of Nevada City, and it's not really predictable until we understand how an art ordinance works, period.
Well, that kind of leads to what Peter's concern previously about the applicability of this in the historic district.
Yeah.
And
I love
that-
art. I'm not sitting in a anti-art position. I see that, you know, there's a little bit more complexity when you have two different processes as it's written currently.
Which is what we have.
Yeah.
That's what we have citywide, right? So
Yeah.
this just says, do what you do already. You have a different standard in the historic district than you do in the rest of the city.
Yeah, and so I don't really know exactly what liberties or how, I don't know what to expect in terms of what people want to put out there as art. I like that there is a review of, I like that there's an arts council or vibrancy committee sitting in as. I think it's really hard to evaluate art because there's all kinds of art. There's beautiful art, there's provocative art, there's all kinds of way that art moves people and what the artist intends. And so I certainly don't feel qualified to decide what is the art that should be out there. And yet we do have to have some governance on that for somebody who thinks that something really pretty broadly offensive is art, and it's not necessarily the message that the community wants to see broadcast out in town. So I like a lot of the process that is built in. And I also feel like, I'm reading the comments from the Historical Society, and I think there's quite a few opinions around that I also do not see harm in establishing an art ordinance that is for everybody, everywhere but the historical district, not to say that it would forever preclude something, so.
Yeah, and my earlier example is that we have already processed, that one exhibit that I talked about, and that was, it came to us and we said, yes, you can put that there for several weeks. And then we had to make an exception to our sign ordinance for the national sign, and that's essentially art. The national sign?
All signs are art
Yes.
by definition.
and that one particularly. And I like it, actually.
But they're
I didn't
regulated
like
as a
it-
sign.
I like it as a sign. I don't like what it is, but that was a,
If
that's
you
a,
could be
that's-
somewhat less theoretical,
But I do want to go back to what Wendy said about temporary art. That gets a little tricky, because if somebody wants to drag out a sleigh and a bunch of reindeer and put them in the front yard for Christmas for a month or so, I don't see where that's going to be harmful. But how do we define that?
Well, this wouldn't regulate residential properties.
just
So they could put it in their front yard if it's a house. If it's a,
Oh,
if it's
okay.
commercial, not, if it's other than residential, then, yeah, that's, are you saying what's the difference between a decoration and temporary art?
Yeah, well, at some point, they're going to,
Yeah.
at some point, one's going to morph into
Yes.
the other.
Yep.
and in that distinction, does residential also include, I'm thinking of Cashin's Field, if they want to do public art, that's a residential development, but is there a different standard for multifamily residential developments? End of question.
They have public art there.
Their sign.
The Takuti Nisanan rock with the inscription.
So should the public art approval process also apply to, residential, multifamily zoning?
I can write that down. It's a very, very different thing to regulate residential activities.
But
From
that's-
a legal standpoint, or?
Legal, practical, everything else, there's a difference between somebody's home and somebody's business.
Well, but say somebody has, the development in the tech center area, what's the name of it? That hasn't, it's been approved, but it hasn't
The Grove.
been built yet, the Grove. Above a certain number of units, it becomes rather, like the project itself becomes rather monumental and could have an impact on the aesthetic cityscape. So it might be something for the council to consider, developments over a certain size of a certain number of units, also have these standards applicable. If it's not a complete legal morass, I see Russ is sort of pondering. or-
It's just a lot cleaner to leave it. The obligation to provide public art is on non-residential construction projects.
But we take anything you got and write it down, it just, that it has, as I would say, it has hair or has thorns. Definitely something we want to look at. There's a difference between the Grove, which will be primarily single-family residential lots. It doesn't matter if they build 100 of them or one of them,
Right.
they end up being somebody's individual property.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a very different thing than,
But-
let's
but
say,
there are groups.
more than 10 units on a single lot, like what Cashin's is. So
Right.
we can look at all of those things and
There-
share
there
with
are-
the council what we find.
There are multifamily sections, though, of the Grove development, so just, so it's not just single family.
Yeah, there's a
And-
fourplex in there and
Yeah, I think a couple or something like that, but and I don't know if other commissioners have an opinion on that.
The residential part?
Yeah, on larger developments, like Cashin's Field, if they were to propose as part of their project.
Yeah,
what
well,
they
and then
did.
the other thing I wonder is like, if it's like an apartment complex where it's commercially owned, is that still considered residential or?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just, if it's the intended uses for residents, yeah.
But remember, that was an SB 35 project, so it came through advisory. They could have
Yeah,
put the Roseville art piece in there.
Right.
I'm kidding, but
Well, I'm going to go back to downtown, since we're kind of skipping around a little bit.
you'll have to think about that, Tom.
So we're talking about private art, right?
Public art on private
Public-
property, yeah.
Yeah, public. okay.
Public art means, you know,
Publicly visible.
visible, consumable, you know,
That's right on my question.
it doesn't
which-
matter,
Which
yeah.
is if one of the owners of one of the buildings downtown says, I want to put a Looney Tunes cartoon on the side of my building because I love, and it violates all of the, in my opinion, it violates the intention of the historical district in terms of the mother lode and the other history we have. So, but that would be on private property. Could we also, in that case, would we be able to stop that intrusion into the historic district look as defined in the ordinances?
on commercial property.
Yeah.
So
Kirsch is, you know,
there's always the in-betweens, right? So you're not approving the Looney Tunes art, you're approving what it's going on and its size and all of those things.
The body that would
The art
approve
review
or
authority
not
would approve the
approve
art.
Looney Tunes would be, yeah, the art
But,
review.
but Peter's talking about the historic district, and if all the regulations that pertain to the historic district, if none of them are overwritten by this ordinance, then what, that is prohibited because that's a mural.
Murals are not prohibited under our ordinance.
It depends on how carefully you read it.
They're not. If the mural is a sign, it's prohibited.
if the mural is a picture of a spaceship,
If it's advertising the business, that's by definition a sign. That is regulated under our sign ordinance. There's nothing that says mural in our ordinance as far as that.
Can I
That's the
ask-
part that you change with the national.
and I'm interpreting the ordinances, the downtown ordinances as compatibility across buildings, streets, and I assume, you know, art, public art. So do we have we being the city, do we have the ability to maintain what's on the books now and not have to have murals or other public art on private buildings? And we don't differentiate between commercial building that's privately owned is still a private building, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's where that section B of that page 6 is. Public art to be located in the historical district shall be consistent with design standards applicable to that district. In particular, the content and time period otherwise established for the district.
Yep. And-
So this does not modify our existing standards for the historic district. With the exception of the last part of that sentence, which I mentioned earlier, it says, or the area's indigenous history before
Yeah.
the city's incorporation.
And the comments I've had over the last 3 days have been about this exact issue. So, so we're not going to get a lot of murals, paintings on buildings in the downtown area because they would be incompatible with the requirements of the historical district.
I mean, that's your interpretation. I think this is my opinion. That is your interpretation if you were reviewing the art. The people reviewing the art may say, oh, this mural is depicting, you know, the Nisenan people, and so therefore it is an appropriate use of painting this wall. I think there's room for that in here. Is that right?
Well, I'm using the language from the ordinance, historical ordinance about compatibility with mother lode is, you know, that mother lode's kind of wide. But anyway, that's the language.
So I guess maybe in
And
part,
so
the-
I want to make sure.
so the question might be what supersedes? Is it the art ordinance or the historical ordinance? You know, because in your
That's one way of
example,
it. Okay, that's another way of asking the question.
if you're asking, does the historical ordinance supersede the art ordinance, then I don't know if they used murals
I'm-
back in the day. I
I'm
don't
saying
know.
that it does because language in the ordinance that uses compatibility in a lot of different places, so could the city find that a particular proposed art is not compatible with the mother lode look that's in the ordinances? Maybe this is a Russ question, or
I think in the folks, and sorry, Russ, the folks in the city attorney's office that worked on this and looked at other places, yes, and it could be in both places, in the art review and in the design review. But there's always, a way that someone could, find to get through things, right? But at the end of the day, just size alone, right? So if somebody was going to today take the brick on the side of the National Hotel and say, we want to replace it with T111 siding. Of course, you can say no because it's not, wasn't made back then. But would they want to, replace it with just, wood batten strips, and they want to take up this amount of size? You say that's not, historically consistent with the architecture of the building and the blah, 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 blah. If they wanted to put art there instead, regardless of if it's Tweety Bird or whatever, if the size is not consistent with the building that it's going on relative to our other ordinances, I think there is room there. That doesn't mean that someone might not appeal your decision.
And my question goes the next step, and it says whatever, if it's a Tweety Bird, big Tweety Bird picture, I think our ordinances would say it's not compatible with the generalized look, which we call mother lode, therefore you can't do that. Now, if they come back with another picture, there may be an argument that it, or they duplicate some of the pictures from the, from
They
100
go to the
years
Historic
ago.
Society, get the black and white picture of a,
There you go.
something cool, but so like the, what's the old, building with the mural on the side that was, redone and now needs to be redone again? The
Horse
barn,
Barn? Horse Barn on Sacramento Street?
One across from TJ's,
yeah.
the street?
What's the name of that place?
The
I think of it as
building
the
with
horse
the
barn,
painting on it,
but-
I know, yeah.
It's got a name. It's the family name. Anyway, so yeah, so it's like, oh, well, that, it looks like that. Then that's historic, right? I mean, that painting was there, before we had a zoning ordinance.
Or Tweety Bird with a miner's lamp and a pickaxe.
So,
But again, you won't be reviewing the actual art content. So there's two pieces there. There's the art
Well-
review and the design review.
So the
okay,
art
whoa,
review,
excuse me. Okay, B, on page 6. Public art to be located in the historical district shall be consistent with design standards applicable to that district. In particular, the content and time period otherwise established for the district or the area's indigenous history before the city's incorporation. So I'm interpreting that as the sign you're proposing on the side of the building is not consistent with the design standards applicable to the district.
Yeah, I think that you have the potential to have submissions where that will be the finding of the planning commission or the finding of the art review authority.
my opinion is that you might have that finding, and probably the case could also be made that painting on the side of a building, there is a historic standard for that, and given that the planning commission doesn't govern the art, in my opinion, the way I'm interpreting this is that the planning commission has the capability of saying yay or nay to the materials and the location, that type of thing. So painting the side of a building did happen. And so you couldn't just say, no, you can't have that, because that's my interpretation. I think somebody else could say, well, painting happened, so it's approved.
I
And
think
so-
there's a crossover in this language, and that's what I'm questioning, and.
I agree.
Okay.
Which is
And-
where I
and-
go back to, I think we should test it in everywhere but the historic district, see how it goes, and write the best art ordinance for the historic district, that would be the goal of where we get to. That's my opinion. Begin with, you know, experimenting in places where there isn't so much, I mean, the historic district is a defining draw for residents, tourists, and so forth. And it's not perfect, and it has room to improve and evolve. And when we have this opportunity to test in a different environment, you know, how it goes, I just think we'll make smarter choices for the historic district next year.
Yeah.
You know,
But I'm starting with this, I'm stuck on this language that says, shall be consistent with the design standards applicable to that district, in particular content and time period.
I get
Okay,
it. I get
okay.
it because
So,
I think
but-
it can be
but-
interpreted
but-
two
but-
ways.
but time.
Yeah.
That, in some cases, that would go to the content of the art if we're talking about a wall mural.
I don't think so.
No, I think so, but reviewed by the art review authority.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Not by
would-
this committee, by the art review body.
I would say, you know, featuring historic architecture, that's the purpose of the historic ordinance, to feature architecture rather than decoration.
Absolutely, that is
So-
actually what it says.
So under, well, two things, but one thing. So in that lens, a painting on a side of a building that doesn't advertise a product is not consistent with the time period that we're preserving. So a painting on a building that isn't an advertisement or a sign is not consistent with the historic district. So if you're not advertising that, so historically, you wouldn't put up a picture of Tweety Bird, you'd put an advertisement up. But advertisements painted on the sides of buildings are prohibited. So that's a possible finding for inconsistency. It's not a sign, so it's not a sign advertising a business, so it doesn't belong painted on a wall in the
Okay.
historic district.
I like that.
It's the Celio barn, by the way. I
There you
remember
go.
that.
Did you just pick that out of your head?
I'm Wi-Fi enabled, so I was searching. That's the misshapen part of my head.
I feel like the fact that there is so much working this around to try to understand exactly what could or could not happen, to me indicates, again, I go back to, if there is concern that there will be ways for people to paint sides of buildings with things that don't reflect the historic district and prehistory. I do think if there's, you know, if there are super pro-art, pro-progress people sitting in those roles, you could end up with something that technically is not a historical sign or based on how this is written. And so if that is a concern, I think, in my opinion, start elsewhere.
Or
Or call it out. Call it out that murals are prohibited, or, you know, but make a recommendation that, you know,
well, the body that's going to be making the decision on the content, I think it could be understood that the district ordinances call on them to look at the compatibility issue, where outside of the historic district, Tweety Bird or whatever is.
Poor
you know,
Tweety.
I know.
Yeah.
It can be considered by the, you know, there's nothing in Seven Hills or outside the historical district like what is in the historical district, which is the requirement to be for compatibility. So I know I'm beating this thing to death.
I think we're agreeing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think so.
In spirit. An issue I have with paragraph B is that it doesn't actually name the historic ordinance. It just talks about design standards. It's not specific enough. That the ordinances that govern the historic district aren't specifically named to to supersede this. It just says design standards. And I think it should say, oh, they're not standards, they're actually the content of an ordinance.
Yeah, I think the standard language we have in there is, you know, as established in 17.060120 or whatever, you know, I mean, you have that in.
I think it really should be literally in that. And also, you know, knowing what a difficult time we have as a commission, following the same guidelines, reviewing sign applications, we're essentially curating this cityscape. We're looking at signs for consistency and how they contribute or don't to the overall aesthetic of the historic district, and how people get mad at us for seeming arbitrary when generally we are in agreement on what the problem might be with a sign. Generally, we're all like, that kind of rubs you, not unanimously always, but often we're in accord, the solution to which we're not always in full agreement. But I'm looking at the political danger of saying no to art. The Planning Commission hates art.
Yeah.
Because they found it inconsistent. And I think that's a real problem for us as a body, and it could change from commission to commission. This commission just loves anything anybody proposes, and that commission doesn't.
Right.
And we're, you know, thinking in the long term, our main asset is the very unique historic feel of downtown Nevada City. It's our brand, if you will. So, I mean, I'm inclined to, because there is a process that public art does go through already that doesn't require public art to be, there is still an avenue for an approval process.
Not really. There is nothing in our ordinance that would give you a finding to make to allow a statue, for example, in front of a business. There's nothing in there. There's nothing you call to that says, you know, this is exempt from CEQA, and this is the, you know, the part of the ordinance that says this is allowed. You know, it's consistent with this part of our ordinance. There isn't that. So much so that we have twice required people to remove their statues.
Where were those?
I don't know where the second one was. The most recent one was at Elevation.
And where was the statue?
Right. Well, not in front of the building. It's the back of the building as you.
And we made them
Look at
remove
it.
it. So that
But
is,
we removed that because we don't allow it. It didn't have anything to do with what the statute.
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
okay, I'm with you.
How about the Planning Commission strongly recommends the prohibition of murals in the historic district as an addition to this ordinance? Commissioners?
I would like to see language that either a period where we don't deal with downtown with public art until we work out some of the wrinkles and the other thing, or put in stronger language. And we've got the consistent with design standards applicable. Now, I think what you were saying is that that's kind of general language. And what you're saying is,
Is include the
Under-
applicable.
yeah, so we define applicable a little bit
So-
more. I agree with you. I'm
Yeah, we have standard language in, like, for example, the sign ordinance, despite the fact that people think it's complicated, it's it's A through K. The sign ordinance is A through K, that's all there is
Yep.
in the entire sign section, right? And K is the signs in the historic district will be subject to 17 point blah, 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 right? So that reference exists in multiple places of our code. That's what this is intended to be, if that addresses your concern as far as that we would hard code the reference to the
So-
section of the municipal code.
I'm gonna be a little bit of redundant. I'm hearing comments from, and questions and ideas, you know. I too, as Tom pointed out, I feel sensitive to not being the, you know, the gatekeepers, the roadblocks to creativity and to a vibrant downtown. You know, I am not anti-art. I am not anti-improvement. I also don't feel personally that downtown is suffering, that Historic District is suffering for not having art. That, in my opinion, I don't see a risk of beginning, other than the perception of us being people who are blocking art, which is not the sentiment I have. What I feel is, let's get smarter about what an art ordinance looks like and how it works. And by the way, strategically, like, why not shift a ton of creative attention to Seven Hills that wants to thrive? Like, why not make that the destination, that it has its own personality, and it is known truly as a creative center? Like, strategically, that just seems like good branding anyway, to like really differentiate the two and have something for everyone and have reason to go to both, in my opinion. But like, you know, my biggest reluctance is that the perception from the public will be like, oh, they don't want people to do stuff. And that is not it at all. I see the opportunity for this, for the non-historic district, particularly Seven Hills. There's abundant space, it's better viewing, it's less complicated in terms of allowing creative people to truly be creative without restraint in historical periods and prehistoric periods. And again, my recommendation would be that we start there with the intention of coming back to the historic district, not of never coming back to the historic district, and trying to find certain criteria and restrictions about, well, let's say we just say no murals. Again, I feel like, well, then we're putting limits on something that, first off, I don't even know if I'm aligned with that, because I like the sign on the National. I think it looks beautiful. I think it was a good addition. And so saying that one medium altogether is not permissible, I don't know if that's the right approach either. I just feel like pump the brakes on the historic district and begin everywhere else, you know? That's a lot of places. I think it's a lot of places. I think we could have a lot of beautiful art, so.
I would support that with the understanding that there's still a mechanism for a proposal for public art
Right.
in the historic
Right.
district, not under this one, but under some of our other rules and regulations and processes.
Right, yeah.
And that's the problem with that, there isn't. There's not something that would enable you to make a finding to allow somebody to do it in the historic district. And, you know, I hear what you're saying, and we'll certainly pass that along to the council. At the end of the day, though, that isn't planning commission work, that's policy work. So,
Right.
you know, the council could say, you were
Whatever.
wrong, we don't even want
Yeah.
a public art ordinance, go away. But they could certainly also say, no, the clear intention of the community was that we want public art everywhere. The only reason I say that is not to dispute what you're saying.
No.
Like I said, I absolutely will
This
take
is my,
everything
this
forward.
is my opinion.
But
I
if there's
understand.
other discrete things that pertain to how you will handle things, I want to make sure that we capture those as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because the worst thing that could happen is from my perspective, is that you're kind of locked into this is how it should be. We just don't do it in the historic district. But then they do it in the historic district, and we didn't capture all the other things
Right,
that could
yeah.
be. So,
Having not
which-
weighed in.
Right.
Yeah,
And-
which you may have. I'm not
Right,
saying you
right,
haven't,
right.
but I just want to
Totally.
make sure we do capture
Well,
everything.
yeah, I hear you. And so that's where, in one of my prior comments, like, I like how it's built in that there is an art review body that is separate from the planning commission. I like that the planning commission still has purview to look at materials and the context of where the art is being proposed. And that seems like it's very well thought out, you know, in terms of, you know, having separate bodies. You know, I don't think a planning commission is qualified to say yay or nay to artwork. That's not, you know, it's just not.
Yea or
Doesn't
nay
make
to,
sense.
to a specific piece of art.
Yeah,
I mean,
specific subject of art of like, I just don't feel like that don't feel like that makes sense. But in representing my opinion, which may be wrong,
No, there's
or not
no-
agreed with,
There's nothing wrong
is-
or right, I just don't want to,
my
Same.
thought is it should be formalized with a date of when it is reviewed. You know, that maybe literally in 1 year, you know, it is agendized that, that having learned from the public art ordinance for everywhere but historic downtown Nevada City, that we have a meeting saying it's time to look at this, because I do think we need to have that here. So it's just, I just don't think we should start with it, that's all.
can I ask if there's a, because all this will go to the council, right? And so sometimes it might be hard to decipher. If that was the course they went, is there still room for temporary art to be citywide and include the historic district? Or you're saying temporary art process would also only include the non-historic district? I'm
So
just,
tell me where the.
because those are, because like kind of,
Yeah,
because you talked about temporary art in the historic district might be okay, and it might have a different standard, but now this would be exclusion of it in the historic district. I don't want to
My
misrepresent
personal
what we
opinion
put in the staff
on
report.
temporary art is that if it doesn't become a part of downtown architecture, it's temporary and therefore would be contained in some way that is temporary. And if it was like a location that was non-repeating, this week we have this like hanging canvas on some blank wall. That just appears once on a wall maybe, or a statue of like a chrome statue shows up someplace and then goes away. Then it adds like seasoning to the, and a sense of excitement maybe to the downtown historic district streetscape.
it's more like an event
But it goes,
versus a
it's an
fixture,
event and it
permanent
goes
fixture.
away.
Is that compatible with what you're
I
saying?
think so, yeah. I think
So
temporary
exclude
art.
permanent public art, but the temporary piece could potentially still be citywide?
Yeah, and you know, honestly,
Not that I get a vote at all. I'm
right,
just,
just trying to represent clarity. I
Yeah.
could say take it or leave it. Like, in my opinion, a year is not a long time, or whatever an appropriate review period is to like test, learn, and apply, you know, a public art ordinance in everywhere but historic. A year feels like, hopefully we would get a few applications, we would get a few installations, it would be wonderful. Will we live or die by not having art in the historic district in that time? No. So I'm open either way. I personally think that I am in favor of temporary art installations.
With a duration of like 3 months or something, so that it doesn't, so it can upset people, or people can not like it for 3 months, and then it goes away, and that can be the purpose of art too, to like make you go, well, that's weird, that doesn't fit. Good, well, it's going away. And something that does beautiful. Sorry.
I said cognitive dissonance.
Well, Sean,
Well,
can,
by the way,
Oh.
I agree. So I think all three of us agree temporary art for downtown, and take a look at how the other area works out and
To
works
consider
itself.
permanent public art on private property.
Yeah.
After a time period of test driving the art ordinance in areas other than the historic district, reconsider it in a time period. Meanwhile, the temporary art installations might be a very satisfying form of expression.
I'm going to give like a kind of obtuse example of why I think it's worth testing first. I hope it goes wonderful. The big brand tire signs that were grandfathered in, those big lighted signs, it's always harder to pull something back once it is approved. And so that's an example to me of like, I don't think that this,
Please don't ever do a variance for a
Commission-
monument sign.
yeah, would have done a variance for a
Note to
monument
self.
sign, you know? And so that's what I'm thinking about a permanent art installation in the historic district. I can think of wonderful things, I'm sure, that eventually could be permanently installed as artwork in the historic district. I just don't think that it's an emergency, and there's so many places to begin.
Yeah, downtown's kind of managed to stay around since the 1800s, so I think another year is not going to change much. That would,
Right.
and they're asking, I'm sorry, Russ, go ahead.
May I add, I just want to add one comment that this ordinance did not come out of the blue.
Yeah.
It has been modeled after cities with 20 years of experience in managing the process, and this is the highest and best that has been found to work well in this format. So, you know, I heard the comment about, you know, well, we should test drive. Well, it's been tested. This is a tested format that works and addresses some various issues that have been modified through the years and challenges, and this is what they've come up with. My other thought is that when you get a sign or you get a proposal that you don't find consistent with the design standards in the historic district, you disapprove it. I don't know why this would be. I have more faith in you to make the decisions, I guess, that
Yeah, so
maybe you do yourself.
I
But
think in part you're
And
referencing
you say no. So
my comment. My observation and part of what inspired me to join the Planning Commission was because of the inconsistency I see from one commission to the next. And my job is not to say that the other people were right or wrong. My job is to interpret what is written, and I presume the other people thought they were doing the same. But when you talk to neighbors and you see different approved projects, it's so dramatically all over the place. And so my opinion is that the same thing can happen with art, and it may be accidental. And it may not be to the liking of the general public if we don't make sure that we get it right and tight. That's my opinion.
I agree with your comment, and it's because you're humans.
Right.
And you're not going to see everything the same way, and
Right.
and things change with the councils and they change with the planning commissioners.
Yeah.
And we end up with some duds for projects sometimes.
Right. And so the whole thing, like, I think this is generally drafted well, Russ. I don't have experience with writing art ordinances, and, you know, I appreciate whoever pulled this together. I know there was a lot of work from Daniela and Adam and staff. And the context that we're working in is quite unique with our own little town. And if there are parts that don't work well for the historic district, in my opinion, it's better to know that before there is some sort of public permanent thing.
I think, so very, very well said, Wendy. And, you know, the difference between this and a sign application is the let's see, the level, the intensity of public scrutiny about art. It's a much higher pressure situation that we'd be in. And I'll also say that when I first saw Nevada City, I've been a lot of places, historic places, and Nevada City has had such a spare aesthetic, which is rare, spare, like not terribly decorated. That's kind of the power of it. And less is more. Simplicity is the key, I think, to the aesthetic that people can't even quite describe about the historic district. So I think we do have a unique situation. So there are two like slight rebuttals to your assurance, Russ, that it's unique and small and fragile, our aesthetic. And plus, the political pressure that saying no to art puts us under.
If you want an example of unpermitted art, go look at the site at Target right now.
Really? What do they have?
Oh, they're painting a mural.
Giant mural.
Of?
It's beautiful. It would have gotten approved. They didn't put it
They
in an
didn't do
application.
that? They
What
didn't?
what is the subject?
It's like a landscape.
It is,
It's a
but
landscape with
is there-
trees up front.
Yeah, I think there's a Nissan element and water because it's in Pineless, Creekless,
Yeah,
across the street.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway,
yeah, and it was.
it
painted-
happens.
And it was
whether
painted,
Yeah.
Ham stand or Target, you know.
And there's a city nearby that has, I can't remember the name of it, but it has public art murals. The
Does
content.
it start
of-
with a G?
I don't remember, but the content of which is like not contributive to the quality of it doesn't project a sense of quality to its context. That's just a comment.
as I say often in these discussions, is Nevada City shows up on somebody's 10 best something or others several times a year. And they talk about the preservation, and they talk about how nice it looks and the compatibility. And I don't think we, as Wendy is hinting at, I don't think we want to mess with that at this point.
It doesn't take much to detract from it. If you're talking about simplicity and spareness, the reduction of spareness, the thing gets lost, the death by 1,000 cuts. Not death, good public art doesn't cause death necessarily, but I would be very much in favor of Wendy's suggestion of reviewing permanent public art in the historic district after a trial period in other parts of the city.
I also.
So that's a recommendation from the Planning Commission, but along with, I mean, if other commissioners agree that temporary public art would provide a lot of fun.
Creative outlet.
Yeah, a lot of opportunity for expression and opportunity for multiple expressions.
And then the piece on public property, so like the parks. Tell me how that works again?
As far
Because it's a
as,
separate piece from this.
correct, yeah,
Yeah.
it'd be a council policy that would enable that. There's some, I mean, they wouldn't need to do that. They could commission an art piece, but because we want this to be available in perpetuity, there's rules about, how you acquire art and deaccessioning it and things like that go into the policy, who owns it, who maintains it, things like that. So it's a very broad umbrella that allows them to do what they want to do. But yeah, the council would be the one that would approve projects in public places.
Yeah, so there's still that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I'll ask you to recall the Planning Commission's input on the hardscape aspects, or the crosswalks and sidewalks on Commercial Street and street signs, which are not generally within our purview in different cities, but as a design review committee, I think we did it's pretty widely agreed upon. It's pretty widely agreed upon that we made good decisions there that really helped the process, and people are really pleased with the results. So it'd be for public art on public property, it'd be nice to be included in not necessarily content, but context. If the Planning Commission could have an opportunity to weigh in on that. I mean, will that be, is part of this art ordinance formalizing a process by which the city council approves public art on public property, or is that just a,
This ordinance, no.
okay, so that's not something we're
This ordinance
considering
is 17, our zoning ordinance.
Okay.
It's an addition to
Well,
our
it-
zoning ordinance.
that process is in G on page 46 of your packet, or it's 46 for me.
But that's
Section-
only if somebody is proposing to do public art on
Public property.
public property, not if the council is proposing to do it. You know, if they're,
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, that's,
so that's where the public art policy, so the council likely will intend to invest in, you know, public art opportunities, you know, whether, like I said, whether it be paintings in front of City Hall or, you know, something in Pioneer Park or whatever the case may be. Those things would not come to you. If, however, a business owner says, you know, a new commercial building's coming into town and they say, hey, I want to put in public art, but I don't want to put it on my building, I want to put it across the street in Pioneer Park, then that approval goes to the city council, not to the planning commission.
so what I'm asking is the planning commission has been helpful in making aesthetic choices for other things around the city, which wouldn't necessarily normally be part of our purview. It'd be nice if the planning commission were also asked to weigh in on G within some context, within some limitations. Like, we're not commenting on, if other commissioners agree with that, it's something to suggest, because we really worked hard on the commercial street crosswalk stuff and you know, invested ourselves in it to a good effect.
Is art on public property, let me reread that. Is it then the public's property? Is it then the city's property when the art goes on public property?
Yes,
So I don't know why, but somehow I feel,
as long as this council approves it and accepts it.
yeah,
That's written
I
in
don't,
here.
I trust the council to do that.
So here's what I would say about that. The council's authority, your authority in the zoning ordinance doesn't include the regulation of public property,
Right.
right? Because it's not. However, I think,
We can be asked for a recommendation.
I think the council and this community for a very long time has leveraged the strength and the input of the planning commission
Yeah.
in these things. So for example, I would anticipate if they wanted to do a permanent art installation in Callanan Park, in the heart of our historic district, that
They're still gonna
they
ask.
would come to you for your input. They would bring it to you just like a regular art would be. They'd have to be the final reviewer, you know, approval, because
Right.
that's their authority.
Yeah.
But if, for example, it was something that was going to go in the field in Pioneer Park, not visible to any architecture, you know, that is
Yeah.
part of Little League, you know, then there might not need to be, right?
Yeah.
Just, but I hear what you're saying. I
So I'm
just,
suggesting a suggestion is all.
Yeah.
And I know that there's no formal process by which we're asked to weigh in on, to give recommendations for other public right-of-way stuff, aside from
Yeah.
outdoor dining.
Yeah.
and that's because of the tie to architecture, right? I mean, we want those
Right.
things to be, same with the commercial street and the hardscape and street signs and, you know, all the rest of it.
So I'm getting the impression you're hearing me.
I don't disagree with you. I just don't get a vote.
I do like Tom's recommendation of being specific about temporary art installation duration. And also, I wanted to ask you to refresh me, because I was at a Vibrancy Committee meeting, and there was a discussion about temporary art, and I was in favor, because again, it kind of follows the, you know, test, learn, and apply type model of like, well, since we haven't really had a process, let's try some temporary art and see what we learn. And so that hasn't specifically been, it didn't specifically carry forward in what is written now.
Everything we talk
Do we
about
know
vibrancy
why?
for temporary
Yeah.
art is in the policy.
Okay,
So that would, so like an example of something the council could conceptually do, that we talked about at Vibrancy, would be a physical art installation on a rotating quarterly basis in Robinson Plaza, you know, where we would commission art, statues, or, you know, physical art pieces, you know, 3 quarters a year, and then the 4th quarter is the Christmas tree and the menorah go in that same kind of spot, as an example. Or erecting a temporary but permanent looking, frame where people could
Yeah.
do painting, and then it goes into that
Changes
site
out.
for 90 days, comes out, and another one goes in there. That was all on the public property, funded by the council, funded by the community kind of work. So we didn't have the temporary piece in the ordinance, but obviously I took
Yeah.
notes about what you're talking about.
And so in
there.
terms of temporary, I do think it would be important to define a relatively short but long enough time frame, like a quarter, 90 days,
Yeah, I think
whatever.
90 days is what it was in there, but
Yeah.
it sounds like that's where you all are on your recommendation.
Yeah.
In shorter, not longer.
Right, because it doesn't get viewed in the public's mind as part of the architecture. It's a.
It's a
whoa,
visitor.
Whoa, what's that? It's a visitor, right?
Yeah.
It's like
Like the
long-term.
Christmas
Not a
tree or
resident.
anything else that's
Yeah.
here and it's gone. And
Right.
in theory, the holiday lights,
Yes.
Right.
Period.
Hey, I turned mine off.
ours aren't on.
I know.
That's another meeting.
The church isn't off, I noticed that.
They are exempt. They can be on the whole year round.
Okay.
Something else I thought I recalled from Vibrancy was definition exclusion, I think, of like garbage cans, fire hydrants, or things, electrical box. Is that true? Is that,
Someone brought up electrical boxes because that's a pretty common one, but it's common in places, one, that have underground utilities. You always have these transformer boxes. And two, it's common in places where the city owns those boxes. None of that's true here. So,
so they would be excluded?
yeah.
I'm not sure I understand.
So
'Cause
sometimes you go to a town and they have, maybe their public garbage cans are painted, or the transformers, they're normally like kind of a light green gray, and they'll be painted with art, like murals and things like that.
Right.
And what I thought I recalled from the Vibrancy Committee was something like that. You must have explained that it's not an option because they're not owned by us.
Yeah. Now, garbage can enclosure, somebody has a dumpster enclosure, SPD, let's say, I'm
Yeah.
just making this up, right? And they want to put a mural on the side of the enclosure, or a tile art piece or something. That would fall under this.
Gotcha.
So it's not that those are prohibited in the ordinance, it's just not
Gotcha.
available as a location of art.
I gotcha.
I
Okay.
get, if PG&E wanted to apply, I guess.
Regarding the art review authority part, the draft, the second paragraph starts with draft ordinance. I'm not sure how long the Vibrancy Committee would be tasked with approving art content. But I think it's very important, and I made a note, and I can read it if you'd like. Since permanent public art will have a lasting effect on the overall aesthetic of the city and also have an influence on subsequent submissions, a jurying body consisting of members with generally recognized attainment in applicable specialties such as art, architecture, art history, those are just suggestions, should be nominated perhaps by members of the Vibrancy Committee or another yet-to-be-established authority nominated. And then the nominee should then be vetted and confirmed by a majority vote of the City Council. The City Council is the appropriate authority for the appointment of this body, since public monies will be used, and they are the elected representatives of the people. Since the art jury could potentially have a strong impact on the visual sense of the city, the City Council, I think, should be the ones who approve of each nominee. Each, and I'm not saying who those, I don't want to say who they are. I have no idea, but I think the composition of that committee is really important, and the just establishment of it is, I think, a kind of urgent, or it should be a very near-term priority of the Art Commission, of the Vibrancy Committee, to have the approval process not be by City Council members, the Art Approval Committee, a jury essentially.
Yeah, so you can't call it jury. So,
Right, but
yeah.
I make reference to like juried art shows, juried
yeah,
craft
totally
shows.
different process, right? Because
Exactly, yes.
then you're rating them and comparing them to others as opposed to they're material compliant or they're not material compliant. So very different, you know.
Yeah, I'm not, that's not our purview. I want no part of that.
So that, I believe that, well, the intention is to eventually have an art commission. That takes, that's a whole nother ordinance, right? So that comes later in the process, and then that commission would be presumably appointed by council. They can create it however they want.
I'm just highlighting that as a
fast follow.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
it's important.
Like maybe have a date, but I mean, nobody's going to slow the momentum on this. It's just a matter of.
Yeah, so the vibrancy committee will, is what's written in here now, and that's the direction of the council. That's who is going to be that body. It's two council members.
Yeah.
Currently, the model that I proposed to them, which they certainly don't have to follow, but I believe that they will be that while they're the committee and they will make the final decision, they will have an input review jury, using your language,
In the art
to
world
their
sense.
benefit. And what I'm used to, what I did in my previous life, is we had a representative from the Downtown Business Association, from the Chamber of Commerce, from the Arts Council. We had an artist in residence that was assigned to it, that was not part of any of the art that they were intended to look at. And then we had someone from the community college art program. And so they were they had the, you know, subject matter expertise.
Right.
And so they would review it and provide that input to, in this case, an arts commission. Because the arts commissioners didn't have to have specific art background.
Right, so that would serve the function of art historian to you know, like, look for traditional references.
Yeah, that's the other one. Historic Society had a seat at that
Yes.
too.
So that's a, you know, I think I speak for us, underlining the importance of getting that rolling. And also, just past that, as written, the Planning Commission shall serve as the design review authority, which will review the design. Then I added design, context, materials, and scale.
That's what's in the language. You're looking at the definitions, right?
Yeah, no, I'm in the draft ordinance
What page are you on?
proposal at the top. It's page, what's the first page?
First
40?
page is 0.
Okay, page 1. It's the introduction to this subject, item 1, draft ordinance, and then background discussion, draft ordinance. So, as written, the Planning Commission shall serve as the design review authority, which will review the design, and it was left at design, and I would like to add design, context, materials, and scale.
What are you looking at? I'm not.
Oh, well, I'm not actually, I'm in a.
Are you on the
different
staff
document.
report or the ordinance?
Yeah, in the staff report, let's see. I don't see a page number here. Well, it's.
The public art review and approval process, is that the section
Well,
you're in?
it's,
No.
it begins with to Planning Commission from Sean Grayson, City Manager.
Oh,
So that's just the staff report.
Yeah.
That's not
okay.
the ordinance.
Okay, so I made my comments in the wrong spot.
So the planning commission is the design review authority unless and until the city council designates or appoints a different body or subcommittee to serve as the design review authority for public art.
That's the definition of
That is
design
the
review authority.
definition.
And then what you do is listed in the body of the ordinance.
Okay, and let's see, where is that in the ordinance?
That is in 17 point.
So we have.
118090, public art review and approval process.
Page number, please?
PDF 45 or 7 paginated in the bottom right-hand corner.
It's also in section 0.020 definitions.
But it doesn't say what they,
As judged by the design review authority for the project.
but the section F is the review and approval of design review authority. So that's what you would do. So you'd look at art review authority's recommendation, proposed location, dimensions, and materials of proposed public art installation, staff's recommendation as to compliance with the public art standard of this chapter, the application submitted by the developer, other evidence submitted for consideration, and then you would approve with conditions or deny.
Conditions.
And then it says the decision of the design review authority shall be final unless appealed to the city council. So you would review all of those things.
I think we're almost there.
I wonder if the word context is important.
How do you mean it?
Yeah, context, what's the universe of context?
This is a, you kind of have a picture, but does this installation also fit does it fit the building?
Like, does
say
it
that it's in
overshadow
front of-
it, or does it,
Yeah.
yeah, whatever?
Is it completely different? Is it harmonious with the business that it's?
That's the part that
in front
says
of?
public art shall comply with the standards set on the municipal code for architectural review and design review. In particular, mounting, fencing, framing, and any related supporting materials shall be consistent with the adjacent buildings.
Okay, yeah,
Consistent.
that covers it, yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
does that match the
I mean, if
context?
you wanted to really get into semantics, consistent to me means it sort of matches. I think you're also talking about complementary, like, does it go with it? Is that kind of what but,
We've used consistent.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, that
In a
that
general
covers it,
sense
yes.
Yeah.
before.
Yeah,
That
Yeah, we're not saying conforming, we're saying consistent.
Right,
Right.
So-
yeah, it
Right.
goes. They go together.
Which allows for a bit of an aesthetic judgment call, which is, what we're
Yeah,
hoping for. I mean,
well,
is it ugly?
I'm never hoping for subjective standards
Yeah.
and ordinances, but the way that our entire zoning ordinance is built has subjectivity in
Yeah,
it, so.
yeah.
And we're not, as written, it's not trying to change that. As written, it's trying to reference what is already there for those objective and subjective standards to be applied now to art. So. But we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, we're on our way.
So I'm good.
Now, okay, so we've talked about some of the language. The other piece that Wendy brought up is put downtown on hold for a year to see how to work out all of the bugs that are probably in there. And, we haven't heard from the artist community yet, although I think they've had a hand in writing this, I believe.
So vibrancy committees heard this 3 times. We started with, I brought them a framework, which was,
Okay.
kind of
Okay.
the big ticket items, and then that was converted into an ordinance, and then they've seen this as what you're seeing today as the final review of it after a pretty extensive work from a different Wendy in the city attorney's office, and I'm sure Russ and others.
So I think, Peter, I think Sean has gotten that as a note from us, what you just underlined, right?
Yeah, the non-historical first, test, learn, evaluate, review in 1 year or define a review period has a recommendation from you, and then the opportunity for temporary art installations with a limited duration, looking at about 90 days. And then you also called out the art review authority and commission and the placement of that. Regulation of multifamily or above a certain amount of units. You mentioned the prohibition of murals in the historic district, although you didn't say that was your recommendation. And then calling out specifically the historic district ordinance in the section saying, in the historic district, this part of the municipal code applies.
Can I add,
Anything you want.
just, yeah, the why behind starting elsewhere is in one part, definitely like, let's see if we need to write it any differently when it applies to the historic district. Also, I truly feel in my heart that this is an opportunity to promote other neighborhoods. I really do see it as an opportunity to, you know, put more energy into the places that I feel like are underutilized, if that makes sense. So that's the other why behind it, is like, yeah, let's push people into more neighborhoods too. So, in spirit of vibrancy. So.
As was mentioned, Seven Hills is really ripe for some upgrades, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a commercial center, it's where people go, we got restaurants and all that stuff, so yeah, I think art addition with these focuses is going to help out
And
Seven
Mark and
Hills.
so forth. I also really want to thank you for being such an exceptional listener and facilitator. It's really wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thank you for bearing with me on this. I think this is probably the non-traditional approach to ordinance development, and hopefully the next ones we do will be more robust, you know, discussion, but this one has a different arc, right? So it
Yeah.
came from council to a committee who worked on it, then it's bringing it to you to go back to the council. But normally they'll, you know, kind of start with you and do some, you know, development, but
It does have a family feel around here, doesn't it?
yeah, I think it's,
Everybody-
well, and at the end of the
everybody's
day,
a relative.
if, let's say I didn't get my way, and I think I'm pretty aligned with what you're saying, but let's say I think this is the wrong way for the city, right? But the majority of the city wants this certain way, you know, then that's fine. But let's still build it with the right words and the right practices, and so that it gets the outcome that the community desires, you know. That's easier said than done, though, when you know, are slicing and dicing the legal words. But that's why I appreciate people like you who are willing to, for free, you know, come in and
All right.
put objective and subjective interpretations of our
semantics.
zoning ordinance.
Okay,
All right.
Thank you.
And is there any additional, you would, Gab, you would mention if anybody had their hand up?
We only had the one.
Okay. So public comment has been heard.
and when I was poking around earlier, I punched in Nevada City and asked the internet, of course, and this is what came back up. Nevada City is known for its beautifully preserved Gold Rush era downtown, featuring plenty of hotels, theaters, and saloons that ooze historic charm. I love the word ooze. But anyway, so that's what the public is getting off of the internet.
They stole some of that from our website and added the ooze.
I was like, we
Oh,
have
ooze
ooze on
isn't
our
on
website?
But anyway, I thought that was kind of charming.
Okay, is there, let's see, do we have any other
We have
business?
a building report.
Lisa,
Yes, I have one other thing. I don't think, does anybody want to go over the building report? It's pretty clear.
I looked
It just
at it.
shows
It
how many
looks good.
permits were pulled within the city last month. And then our next regular meeting will be July 20th at 1:30. And also I wanted to alert you all, and I will send an invite. I had a busy day yesterday and I didn't get it out. June 29th, we're going to have a special meeting with City Council for the CAPC. We call it CAPC for short. It's the Climate Adaptation and Public Safety Element General Plan Update. So we have a consultant that's been preparing that element of the general plan, and we've gone through some review with all the different departments, especially fire chief, because it is a lot focused around welfare and the potential for something to happen here. And so it's ready for us to start discussing with council and planning commission.
And will we get,
nearly ready.
will we get study materials beforehand?
the Friday before when we post the agenda.
Okay.
And this is a workshop, so it is first blush of the draft, getting public comment, just like you did before they even started the process. What's the public comment on it? This is not the adoption process at all. So there could, if there was significant enough comment here, because it will still be in the environmental review, it could necessitate a change to the draft item. If it's just minor things, it'll, come back to you with all of those comments for planning commission review and then ultimately for council review. It's a little different on how we do the public hearing noticing and the timing of this as opposed to a regular ordinance, but the intention is to be done by September 1st, right?
It is a long document, so you won't be able to read the whole thing in a week. Well, I mean, you could. Sean can.
John can. Yeah, well.
He can and he does.
He's not applicable to others, I think.
But yeah, there is also a page on the website under the long-term projects or current planning projects.
To sort of preview.
Yes,
Okay.
there's some content up already.
We'll have a press release out on Monday, and it'll link to that and.
Oh, good.
Try to direct people to come to the meeting and all those things, so.
Okay. Well, and from the chair, thank you for your time today and
Thanks for having
doing
me.
all this with us. Yeah. And with that.
And thank you to Gabby for clerking. This will be our normal
Yeah.
Thank you,
Oh,
Gabby.
really?
process.
Oh, wow. All right.
Either
Cool.
Gabby or somebody else try to, make it a little easier for Lisa to focus on the, the subject matter expertise
yeah.
and
Yeah,
us to
yeah.
handle the,
Technical part.
yeah.
Cool.
That's
Good.
that's
Very
wonderful
nice.
to be IT person and, and planner. It's a lot. It's a lot of hats to wear on your head at once. Great.
Were you going to adjourn?
Yeah, would you like to say something before we adjourn?
Well, I have a question, and I was reviewing a prior meeting, and there's a project that is progressing not in accordance to the approved plans. And I think there is an impact to the neighbor. Are they supposed to just call that out, or how does that work? Do I come to you? Do I tell them to come to you?
It's,
Code compliance.
there's a planning issue. I mean, there's a,
Not following the
I think
approved
first you
plan?
would
Yeah.
alert me so that I could check the conditions of approval.
yeah, I mean, you
and
can
what
always
was-
refer something to her. Any
approved.
member of the public could call Lisa, can go on our website and there's on the left-hand side of our homepage, there's a whole bunch of buttons, and one of them says, it's a submit a report, a complaint.
Okay.
And so you can put it in there, and it'll go to multiple folks here, and we'll take a look.
And
if
the
it's-
correct authorities then look at it.
Yeah, because if it might be planning, it might be building,
Right.
which is the county, it might be code enforcement.
Yep, okay,
Yeah.
cool,
All right,
good to know.
most productive.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
With
you.
that, thanks to everyone. We're adjourned.
Thank you, Russ.
Thank you.
Where's Russ?
Thank you. Y'all.